Good evening and welcome to my channel. I'm going to read you another story, which will be, it's actually quite a long one. It's not quite twice, but like one and three-quarter times the length of my normal stories, but hopefully you'll still enjoy it. It is based as ever on 5 random words, and these are, and this story is called Frozen Rain. Branston's world was simple, even simpler than the existences of most of his fellow citizens. He'd receive an instruction packet, jump in his buggy, and go to neutralize the threat wherever it lay. He did this quietly, efficiently, and with the minimum of fuss. Branston was a man of preparation and precision, a loner who didn't so much love his own company as have an extremely high tolerance to it. On one particular balmy summer evening, he heard the vacuum tube clunk in the corner of his pod, and the siren sounded. Branston strolled over to collect the instructions. The roll of paper inside the tube gave precise coordinates, the name of the tribe, the individual recipient, and disposal instructions. It all seemed quite straightforward. He finished his evening meal, switched off the screens, and began to pack. The only unusual aspect of this particular assignment was that it was the first time he'd be visiting the Federation's northernmost tribe, the Inuit. Named after an indigenous people of the ancient northern regions, the Inuit were secretive, even more isolationist than most tribes, and rumoured to be prone to melancholia and early suicide. Must be all that endless night, Branston thought, as his buggy shimmered up into the night sky on its 4 props and began to convey him towards the selected coordinates. His octo told him it'd be 12 hours and 19 minutes until arrival, so Branston decided to get an early night, unrolling his sleeping bag and snuggling up in the fetal position that was all that a one-person bug would allow. Branston asked his octo to play some gentle oceanic sounds and slipped easily into a deep sleep. When he awoke, the northern sun was already up, or perhaps he should say it was still up, since at this time of year, his octo informed him, it never truly set. His own tribe, the Southern Caucasians, were used to a lot of diurnal and seasonal variation, living so close to the Earth's equator. In New Scotland, the mountainous archipelago left behind when the oceans flooded the United Kingdom almost 400 years ago. He wondered what it must be like to endure whole seasons of light or darkness. He'd heard the rain sometimes froze this far north too, although he couldn't quite imagine that. It must be like dodging bullets. Branston slurped down a protein shake from the bug's food processor and asked Octo to fill him in on what to expect from the Inuit. Within minutes, his mind filled with a whirl of facts, sensations, even historic old memories which he could experience as if they were his own. The flashing icon at the periphery of his vision served to remind him that none of these things had actually happened to him. Branston had certainly never butchered a bull seal, sawed a hole in the ice for fishing, or brewed tea from stringy vegetation in thawed-out ice water. Christ, these people were primitive, he thought, before reprimanding himself and recalling the Federation's motto: reserve judgment, respect difference, remain distant. Still, fishing through a hole in the permafrost. Come on. An hour later, the bug descended quietly behind a copse of stunted trees adjacent to the target house. Branston checked his pulse weapon and clicked on his feed, so that everything he experienced would be sent directly to home. A small wooden shack was half concealed by the pine woods at the edge of a field whose rutted mud was frosted over. It was hard to imagine anyone living so far off-grid, although of course nobody was truly off-grid these days, since home, the AI overseeing Earth's people, was all-seeing and all-knowing. Home had known that this man, Calic, had somehow managed to switch off his octopus, the cranial implant that all humans have fitted at birth to enable metaconsciousness. This was an illegal act, although it was also possible it had been accidental. Branston was there to find out. He knocked loudly on the well-weathered door of the shack. "Federation Inspectorate! I have a warrant!" He heard nothing in response apart from, after a moment or two, a pattering percussive sound. Footsteps? A figure emerged on the far side of the house, making off across the field. Damn! His target was running. It happened sometimes. He fired off his pulse gun a couple of times. It would usually connect, even with a turned-off octo, and cause temporary paralysis in its wearer. Unfortunately, nothing seemed to be happening, and the small, stocky man in the heavy hooded coat was making surprising speed as he bolted for the trees on the far side of the field. Branson could go back for the bug, but then he'd lose sight of his target, and with the subject's octo entirely dead, tracking his target could prove tricky. He began to run after the receding Inuit, shouting for him to halt. Hurling his authority status after the running tribesman seemed futile and absurd, so Branson shut up and concentrated on not tripping over the frozen, solid, rutted earth. He'd never seen mud do this. The Arctic permafrost had receded to a little over 10,000 square hectares, and temperatures in Branson's world hadn't been sub-zero for 300 years. He shivered under the electro-heated suit and felt a numbness in his extremities that he guessed might be dangerous. His breath clouded around him as he ran, another weird phenomenon he'd been warned about but hadn't expected to be so surprised by. The target, a man supposedly in his 60s, was making good speed, but Branson was 34 and ran 5 times a week for fitness, and within a few minutes he caught up with his quarry. "Wait! I don't want to use force!" He really didn't want to grapple a pensioner to the ground, but it looked like he didn't have to. A few hundred yards from the tree line, Calec stopped, bent over, hands on his knees, breathing heavily. "Calec, kill Martin!" The man waved a cursory hand, still catching his breath. "What do you want?" he said without looking up. "You turned your octo off," said Branston, getting out his reactivation kit. "I'm required to reinstate it and issue you with a warning." The man, remarkably, was laughing. Most people blanched, knowing that the reactivation process was invasive, painful, and had legal ramifications. "Look here," said the man, his accent thick and strange. Branson moved closer. Calec had taken his hood down, and his wizened, sun-bronzed skull shone in the light as if polished. All along the side of his head, round the back, and along the opposite side was a jagged scar, the flesh recently stitched back together. There was still crusted blood along the seam in places. Branson felt like vomiting. This man had had radical and amateur surgery performed upon him. "You took it out," said Branston unnecessarily, an edge of wonder in his voice. Calec nodded. "You want to arrest me now?" Branson wasn't a law enforcement officer as such, but he should call this in, report this man so that he could be taken by the appropriate forces. That's what I should do, he thought, but I don't want to. Without asking himself why, he clicked off his feed. He could say it had malfunctioned. "Why?" he asked almost plaintively. "Why would you do that?" "Why?" asked Calec, as if this was a really dumb question. "The same reason I came up here. Became Inuit. For some fucking peace and quiet, that's all. Look around you." Branson did, hearing nothing but very distant birdsong. His octo, as if perturbed by the lack of data, began to feed him statistics about the region. Branson cast the feed to the periphery. "Beautiful silence," said Calec. "No need to be connected with gadgets and squids. I'm as connected as I need to be already. You see those trees?" Branson looked towards the forest fringe. "Can you name them?" Calec said, "without asking your squid?" Squid was the derogatory name for the octo, used by those who rebelled against home and its far-reaching tentacles. Branson shook his head. "I have no idea. What's your point?" Calec grinned smugly, waving a pointing finger along the trees like a conductor. "Spruce, Douglas fir, Scots pine. Used to be too cold, ice too thick for trees up here. These are youngsters, less than 200 years old. I know all this from experience, not because I downloaded it." Branston sighed. There was so much wrong with what the old Inuit was saying, he didn't know where to start. Octos weren't implanted to replace experiential learning, just to augment it. He was about to begin to explain why he ought to report Calec to home when he felt something peculiar on the side of his face. It felt like moisture, but also like a feather. He felt another one touch his eyelash, looked up and saw strange white pieces of something spiraling down. Snow. As ever, Octo supplied the word, but even experiencing it, Branson scarcely believed what was happening. It was as if the sky had been torn into confetti and thrown down. This was the frozen rain he'd heard about, not falling as bullets, but drifting, swirling, collecting on the ground in crystals. Calec was looking at him quizzically. "I've never seen snow," Branson explained, knowing now that he would stay a while, watching the snow fall, then get back into his bug and fly away. He'd tell home that the old man had suffered a coronary and died before Branson could serve his warrant. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said Calec. A lump had formed in Branson's throat and he couldn't speak, so he simply nodded and gazed up into the drifting white chaos all around him. "Would you like some tea? Warm you up before you go?" said Calec. Branson smiled. "Can we watch it snow for a bit? You can see it from inside." "I'll make a fire," offered Calec. A fire? What more wonders awaited? Calec patted him on the shoulder in passing and began to trudge back towards the house. The snow had formed a paper-thin layer that nevertheless felt crunchy beneath Branson's feet as he followed the old Inuit back towards the shack. As he did so, he took out his pulse weapon and switched it to its lowest setting, the one that would knock out an octo for up to 20 minutes before it rebooted. It would be nice to enjoy a bit of peace and quiet for a change. The end. Yes, I enjoyed writing that one. I think it might be the start of something, or worthy of expansion, the whole world that I've sort of created there. Anyway, if you'd liked it, do tell me what you thought. Subscribe to the channel, please. Maybe watch another one and share. And I will be back again, and I will see you soon. Bye.